My syllabus is feelings are hurt. So that's worse than Captain K's feelings hurt when the syllabus feelings hurt. Real quick, we'll try to wrap up as much as we can. Definitely wrap up OEF today. Hopefully get through all or most of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Anything left, we'll have to finish up next week. But what else, according to the syllabus, is next week? Briefings. Okay, so we'll be looking for about half you to go next week, and then half you the week after, just kind of spaced out. So who's that? What's the day today? 15. Okay, Antonio Interior. Yeah. You guys probably looking for about probably 4 or 5 of you to go next week. Any volunteers? Wow, a lot. All right, I'm gonna turn around. I want 5 volunteers. Duke it out. Is that 5? I'm sorry.
It was 6. I put my arm down.
Okay. So. Kenny, was your hand up too? Yes, sir. Okay. What's protocol for uniform for the cadets in here?
Service dress.
Okay, so just make sure come ready for that. Any questions in the briefing? Again, 5 to 8 minutes. Make sure you have slides of some sort. For special students, I'm not real picky about what your slides look like. I just think they help any kind of oral presentation kind of go a little smoother. And then for the cadets, obviously, just remember a good introduction, main body, conclusion, and make sure you're not reading off your slides, stuff like that. Practice. Any questions? All right, real quick for the cadets in here. I didn't ask 100 yesterday because I think a lot of them were really sleepy, but what did you think of that presentation that Lee led yesterday, the 13N? Good? Learn a little bit about the nuclear enterprise. Anybody interested more in than they would have been before? Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, maybe? Not top of your list, but okay. Maybe it doesn't sound as bad. I don't know.
Yeah, it made them sound better than what we've heard from before.
Yeah, definitely sounds better than you're just sitting in a hole for 24 hours straight. 365 days a year. Yeah, basically like being a submarine, just somewhere in, so a submarine is just very
Okay. So we had a presentation yesterday at our leadership laboratory from a couple of career missile leaders. So kind of talked about earlier in the semester during the Cold War, we had people just sitting in missile silos, just waiting to turn the key. But we still have a lot of people doing that as their career in the Air Force. They were coming, teaching us about the career fields. I learned quite a few things, so sounds like a lot better than what my peers were going through as young lieutenants. So good stuff. All right, we'll move forward. Gonna stop probably about 2 minutes early. Might have some information for the cadets in here they might be interested. So we'll just leave it at that. Maybe that'll keep everybody engaged. So, in addition to the background papers, what was the other assignment to do?
Watch the video.
Okay. I'm not going to ask how many people watched it, but we're going to talk about it real quick for a few minutes. So, what was the main purpose for that Chinook helicopter putting Rangers on that mountaintop?
Rescue the SEAL who fell off the helicopter prior to the first helicopter. And so, yeah, they were
Okay.
the rest. Yeah, there was a whole team of people.
Okay. What was the SEAL's name who fell out?
Wasn't it red hair guy?
Red hair guy.
I feel like no one dead once fell out.
They didn't know right away. I remember they kind of did accountability when they got back. His name was Robert. Hence Robert's Ridge, named after him. Okay, so kind of immediately, what were some of the issues the helicopter putting the Ranger team and the Air Force Special Forces folks in? What was kind of some issues they ran into?
Well, initially they didn't get communication across well that they weren't supposed to go to the top or where they were headed, so they went to the wrong spot, which caused complication.
Okay. And what happened when they went to the top or
They
spot near the top?
got bombarded and shot down.
Okay. Meanwhile, where was the other helicopter? Remember there were two teams.
The other helicopter was
Okay.
didn't they have like the same communication conference?
Yep.
They weren't supposed to go through making.
Okay. So a lot of miscommunication. Basically, they got the communication opposite of what they were supposed to get. It said, "Hey, don't go put this team in at the top of the mountain," and somehow that got translated as "put the team in at the top of the mountain." Okay. So after a helicopter got shot down, kind of what were they facing on top of the mountain there?
So right away they're kind of shot down in a bad spot where they're kind of at lower ground, and then there were enemy forces like already bunkered in up the hill that were shooting at them.
Okay. So we had the bunker.
Yes, there's bunkers with machine guns, and then also other enemies with like RPGs and later mortars.
Okay. So the mortar team that kind of kept closing in closer and closer.
Yeah, there were a few relatively fortified positions surrounding the helicopter, so they got caught right through those.
Okay. So I think it was about 3 or 4 were killed kind of almost immediately on the crash, or immediately after the crash with the gunners on the helicopters. As you kind of saw, they kind of were pulling people off the helicopter. Then they were pinned down. The Army captain, Captain Buck. It's like one silver guy. Okay. Whatever. I can't remember his name now. I'm blanking out. Remember, he kind of decided to push them to a position where they would have some cover from a rock. All the meanwhile, the Air Force combat controller on the ground. What was he doing the whole time? He was the bald-shaped head guy talking throughout most of the video.
So trying to get people on the radio and get support.
Okay, so kind of amidst everybody else patching up the wounded guys, kind of setting up the perimeter. He kind of was one of the first guys off the helicopter going, trying to get aircraft on site. So in that effort, what were some of the first aircraft on the scene that he was able to get? Son?
The F-15.
Okay, so F-15 Strike Eagles. You remember what kind of weapons they said to use?
Close.
That was a little later.
Wasn't just the frontal gun.
Yep. So it was basically the air-to-air gun on the aircraft was what they wanted him to use, because they were worried at first those larger air-to-ground bombs kind of wouldn't be a good thing. Did the machine gun fire work though from the F-15? Okay, kind of suppressed the air or the ground emplacement for a little bit. They got called off because what other aircraft then were coming in?
F-16.
Okay, F-16. Anybody know what happened though initially with the initial F-16s coming in? Do you remember? Kind of a small detail, but Chef's got it. Okay, yeah. So initially, remember they kind of were told like, hey, they were diverted to another mission. I think they said something like they got orders from the AWACS. Remember that's the big radar dish in the sky that they were diverted somewhere else. Eventually, though, there were F-16s brought in. And remember, kind of the F-16 pilots' hesitance. Anybody talked about the 500-pound bomb? Anybody know what they said? Usually, kind of the closest you want to drop that to friendly troops is.
So like 350 meters.
Okay. Yep. So it was deep actually, 300 yards. So again, that's not all that far. It's like 3/4 of a lap around a track. Anybody remember how close though the ground troops were asking for it?
50 meters.
Yep. Exactly. So there was a lot of coordination of okay, well I want you to come in, try it straight with the gun this way. Then they kind of started trying to drop the bombs. Closer and closer. In the end, though, did any of the F-16s, were they able to take out that bunker? Okay, anybody remember what aircraft finally did come in?
Unmanned Predator.
Yep, the unmanned Predator. So anybody remember who was flying that? Actually, it wasn't Air Force.
CIA.
Okay, CIA. CIA was kind of like the original owners of the Predator mission in the early days of Afghanistan. So we kind of took that on. We'll talk about that more in the lecture today. And then kind of finally, once higher headquarters kind of realized what the actual situation was, what was kind of the limitation in extracting all those folks. See, new hand. Kennedy, remember?
The value of enemy fire or the fact that they just kind of would sporadically start shooting at them.
Okay.
They're kind of waiting till nightfall.
Okay. What was the only drawback with waiting till nightfall?
The lives that were like already, the people that were already hurt were starting to like bleed out and needed to be like taken care of.
Okay. So kind of like the most urgent need was actually an Air Force controller on the ground, Senior Airman Cunningham. So kind of interesting. And again, we kind of talked about in the video. All the troops on the ground were like, "Hey, I would not have ever wanted to have to make that call in a million years, whether to bring those helicopters in either in daylight or darkness." By waiting till darkness, it cost Airman Cunningham his life. But kind of can just see some of the different issues. We kind of talked about at least last semester, early on. I think we talked about fog, friction of war. Sometimes things you don't have all the information, things don't go right. I think this is kind of a good case study in that. And later on down the road, when you get on active duty and stuff, you'll talk about this kind of down maybe at like the captain and squadron officer school, things like that. Yep.
Nowadays, would it be more common to just have a drone come in?
Yeah. So it was kind of like new technology at the time. So I think a lot of mentalities were okay. Well, we got these different fighter aircraft, which is kind of this legacy mindset of these are the weapons we use in kind of air to ground attacks. And I think it was kind of in the early days of the war too. We were kind of still figuring out how to wage this kind of mountain warfare as well. And we'll talk about it today to the evolution of kind of heavy big bombers like the B-52, which we talked about with the Vietnam War. We used a lot of those and B-1 bombers, which are also really huge bombers because they could just kind of orbit overhead, cover huge swaths of country, with kind of smaller 500-pound bombs. They can kind of swoop in at any time and drop those. So we'll talk about that more kind of throughout the lecture. So.
Is there any knowledge as to whether the Predator was on station originally, or did the CIA just kind of happen to know there was this issue through their CIA meetings and then just kind of come in and help out, or did the Air Force call for them?
I don't know the exact story how it went down, but I think the Air Force kind of sorts in, okay, what aircraft do we have? As the situation became kind of more and more dire, that's kind of when they started looking, okay, what other assets do we have? Cool. We're going to get back to Operation Enduring Freedom. So we're going to talk about the different U.S. objectives as laid out by that gentleman on the left. Anybody know who that is? In the suit? Secretary of Defense. Anybody know who it was at the time? Donald Rumsfeld. Good. You did not say Duck. Outstanding. Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense at the time, laid out articulated the objectives of the military operations. He laid out 6 main key points. So made it clear the Taliban leadership within Afghanistan and their supporters that harboring terrorists is unacceptable and carries a price. So remember, Al Qaeda was kind of the terrorist group. The Taliban was kind of the group of kind of tribal leaders that were running Afghanistan, allowing Al Qaeda to take up arms in their country. Next, we're gonna acquire military intelligence to facilitate future operations against Al Qaeda and the Taliban regime that harbored terrorists. So, gonna make a point. Gonna gather intelligence. Third, we're going to develop relationships with the groups in Afghanistan that oppose the Taliban regime and the foreign terrorists they support. It's kind of the way we did, develop these relationships with these different tribal leaders. Is we put together like these teams. You don't need to know this, but they were called provincial reconstruction teams. So basically, they would assign typically under like command of like a lieutenant colonel, so somebody like Colonel Gore. They'd put together like a team under somebody's command, and they would basically kind of like almost embed with these villagers to a certain extent. Help bring in humanitarian supplies, things like that. Kind of almost in exchange for information on Al Qaeda movements. So remember, Al Qaeda a lot of times they were kind of like maybe farmers by day, and then maybe attack us at night, living kind of amongst the general population. Okay, few more of the military objectives, and I'll send these slides, or I'll post these to Learn UW for you. We're going to make it increasingly difficult for the terrorists to use Afghanistan freely as a base operation. So again, a couple of these kind of run together. We're going to deny the Taliban the offensive systems that hamper the progress of various opposition forces. So kind of trying to figure out wherever these weapons were coming into Afghanistan from, whether it was over the Pakistani border, the Uzbek border, wherever they were coming from, we were going to cut off whatever offensive systems they had. So whether small arms rifles, anti-aircraft weapons, things like that. And lastly, provide humanitarian relief to the Afghanis suffering under truly oppressive living conditions under the Taliban regime and the presence of Al Qaeda. So that was kind of a big push by President Bush. Again, we didn't want to be seen as warmongers coming in trying to take over a country. We were trying to be seen as liberators. Any questions so far? Okay, so next we're going to kind of talk some different contributions of air power. We're going to move through these fairly quick. Just want to kind of give you a different flavor of kind of what air power brought to the fight. So the first is what we're going to broadly call data fusion. So what we describe this is, for the first time in the history of modern warfare, Operation Enduring Freedom was conducted under an overarching intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance umbrella that stared down relentlessly in search of enemy activity. That umbrella was formed by a constellation of overlapping multispectral sensor platforms. Wow, that's a mouthful. So what that means, though, is we just had different ISR assets, so intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, aka looking at the bad guys, kind of overhead at all times. So E3 Sentry, which is that aircraft, what's that more commonly known as that we talked about?
AWACS.
Okay, so AWACS, E8. So again, AWACS, remember that's just the eyes in the sky, looking at other aircraft, looking kind of what's going on, helping kind of get aircraft, maybe controlling the airspace, getting these aircraft over to this sector where we need their help. E8, which is a very similar aircraft to that, known as the Joint Stars. All you need to know is that's the E8 was basically doing that same job, eyes in the sky, but it was looking at the ground, so looking at troop movements, typically kind of more looking at vehicles, things like that on the ground. The RC-135, this was just a signals intelligence aircraft, so that was kind of able to pick up maybe radio waves, communications, things like that as well. Remote piloted aircraft, so we kind of had the Predator was the main one in the early days. And we even used the old Cold Warrior, the U-2 spy plane, that the same kind of aircraft that spotted the Soviet missiles getting moved down to Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So pretty crazy, about 40, 50 years later, still using that aircraft. And then some of our fighter aircraft also had some infrared capability as well. So you know, you kind of just see the kind of benefits down there. At times, targets can be actually emailed to aircraft, so special operations forces on the ground could actually like link up, you know, maybe with hypothetically, you know, the those eyes in the sky, send that information there, and they can get that information to bomber fighter aircraft to get bombs on the ground, literally within minutes, as opposed to kind of like, you know, maybe hours in previous conflicts. Any questions so far? Okay, next we're going to use our favorite S word, synergy. A lot of synergy between air and ground troops. So basically, we kind of saw this a lot in the Roberts Ridge video. So it wasn't just Army Rangers on that helicopter. Who else did we say was on that helicopter? Okay, pararescue, and who else? Okay, yeah, we call them combat controllers. So those guys calling in the airstrikes, getting the communications going between the ground and the aircraft. So this was not just an Army show on the ground. And remember, they were going in to help out a Navy SEAL unit, and there were Air Force people attached to that SEAL unit as well. Kind of made this unique also was in the early days of Afghanistan, CIA, just like we saw with the Predator, they had a huge role in the war in Afghanistan in the early days. They were kind of the intelligence experts oftentimes on the ground. So usually there were CIA CIA people embedded with these units as well. And it was kind of crazy, you know. We saw watching TV, watching the news at night. You know, they're showing just kind of some quick snippets of these special operations teams. You know, and they're climbing through the mountains of Afghanistan, and literally you saw these guys all equipped with all their electronic gear, like riding on donkeys, like through the mountains of Afghanistan. So pretty crazy. Kind of like Rambo 3, where Rambo's riding, you know, a horse against the Soviet tanks. The Afghanis didn't have tanks, but anyways, so you see the results up there. You know, better precision strike instead of you know, classic close air support. So you know, they can, like we kind of talked about on the previous slide, they can send in exact kind of coordinates, you know, digitally, things like that. Anybody know what that is? Oh, I thought you were.
What? Me? No.
Oh, okay. Put your hand kind of up a little bit.
American Sniper, dude.
Nope. Another movie. Marky Mark.
Yeah, I've seen it.
SEAL Team 6.
Okay. Marcus Luttrell. So Lone Survivor. Actually, a picture of him.
That's a good movie.
Okay, so again, kind of talking, you know, President Bush, big supporter of humanitarian relief. You know, this was really tied to the air mobility component of the Air Force. So, you know, cargo aircraft bringing in supplies to help out the Afghani people. So, you know, September 11th, 2001 was when really we were forced into this war. And as early as October 6th, we really kind of got this moving in full swing. And from October 6th through the first 6 months of Operation Enduring Freedom, we moved as many supplies in during those 6 months as we had done. I'm sorry. The amount of supplies moved in those first 6 months was basically the biggest military airlift we had ever accomplished in our United States military history. Second only to the Berlin airlift. I remember bringing milk to all those little children in Berlin against the Soviet blockade, and then also only to Operation Desert Shield in 1990, 1991. So remember, Desert Shield was kind of the build-up to the liberation of Kuwait, where we were moving basically 500,000 troops and supplies into place. So pretty big airlift operation, considering, you know, we're talking about a third world country, not a huge populated country, in a very short period of time there. So Gore be disappointed. What kind of aircraft is that?
C-30.
C-17. And kind of this last point here. Geographically, you know, how would you describe Afghanistan? Was there a lot of ports of entry?
Mountains.
Landlocked.
Okay, landlocked country. So basically, everything we were bringing in was brought in by air, really for those first 6 months, until we were kind of able to work more with neighboring countries. Pakistan eventually let us kind of get some truck routes coming in and stuff like that, but kind of really rugged terrain. That border with Pakistan is very mountainous terrain, very kind of slow routes through there. Okay, who wants to be a space warrior someday? Maybe, do you? Okay. So space obviously played a huge role as well. So providing kind of info to those special operations missions. You don't need to know what the acronym stands for, but there's a system called BRIGHT, Broadcast Request Imagery Technology Equipment. So this is basically enabling operators on the ground to get satellite feeds from outer space. So I kind of compare this to how many people played Call of Duty? Don't be embarrassed. Okay, only one of the ladies. Can't believe that. Just kidding. So the kind of Call of Duty, like when they're like, oh, they pull up this thing and now it's the eyes in the sky, kind of looking down. That's kind of what it was reminiscent of. So they can kind of get better feeds. There's a note here about bandwidth being an issue. So in the early days, it's kind of a technological stumbling block in the early days, where we only had enough bandwidth with our satellites to, I think, operate something like 6 Predators in the area of operations at a time. We improved that, kind of saw that limitation and improved it moving forward. The next distinctive contribution of air power we're going to talk about is CAOC operations. So anybody remember what CAOC stands for? Or AOC stands for? Air
Operations.
Yes.
Command.
Another C word.
Command.
Those are good words. Center. So the Combined Air Operations Center. So remember, 2001, we're still not at war with Iraq, but what are we doing in Iraq? Okay. No fly zones in which operations? Okay, Northern and Southern Watch. Which operations were we running out of Saudi Arabia? Okay, Southern Watch. So basically that same Air Operations Center that was kind of doing all the command and control, basically kind of see the big room there, keeping an eye on everything going on in the air war. That same facility was being used to wage the air war in Iraq, enforcing that no-fly zone over southern Iraq, as well as basically running the air war in Afghanistan. So, kind of a huge feat there, that there were all those operations getting watched in that same and run in the same location. Yes.
So that's in Saudi Arabia.
Yes. So, pretty crazy that, and this kind of continued even when we kicked off Operation Iraqi Freedom, that we were running basically 2 air wars out of the same command and control center. So,
get deployed to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so a lot of people, they would get deployed to this location just to basically sit in this room. Basically, like the 3-star air general, whoever, whether it was like an Air Force guy or gal, or Navy or Marine, basically air general running the air war. They were the ones kind of like looking at these screens, and they have experts all around them giving them information about, the mobility people, kind of giving them good information, bomber people, fighter people, kind of just giving them good information. This is where they're gathering all the intelligence together and kind of making all those big decisions. So, obviously they're doing 2 air wars. Staffing was kind of a problem initially, so initially, like for the first 6 months of the air war, everybody was working like 14, 60-hour days for like a couple months straight, like without any days off. So pretty crazy stuff. Okay, and then got a few more contributions of air power. Don't even know a whole lot about this, but we built up a large military base at Manas, Kyrgyzstan. So kind of like we talked about with the humanitarian mission, you know, landlocked country. We had to fly most of our stuff in. We needed a staging area to do that. So we opened up basically a base. We've actually paid for it. It was like something like, I can't remember what it was, $50 million a year. We're paying the government of Kyrgyzstan. I don't know if to say Kyrgyzstani. I don't know. We were paying the government of Kyrgyzstan a large sum of money every year, basically, to keep this airfield open. So this kind of was our staging area to bring a bunch of supplies in. You know, and this basically kind of helped us feed all these different bases kind of throughout Afghanistan with supplies. This is kind of the staging area. People would kind of land there, be there for a day or two before they were either flown via smaller transport aircraft, whether they were, you know, Air Force cargo aircraft or helicopters, kind of out to their operating locations. We set up this contingency response group there, and basically what a contingency response group is, it's like a whole slew of different people who kind of come together and they just go forward and deploy and basically set up an entire base. So they'll set up an airfield, you know, they'll set up, you know, so they'll have airfield people, they'll have civil engineers setting up either, you know, kind of tent cities, is what we call them. So tents basically for all of our people live in. CE people also set up electricity, toilets, all that kind of stuff. But then there'll also be kind of maintenance people there planning, okay, what kind of facilities do we need for this, operators, you know, kind of just to get a bare bones space going. And they kind of deploy to Kyrgyzstan to do that. And we just left this base in Kyrgyzstan, it was about a year or two ago. So most cargo pilots who kind of served in Operation Enduring Freedom, they spent at least a little bit of time over in Kyrgyzstan. Okay, and then just broadly talking, a couple pieces of new technology. You saw it in the video, the increased role of remote piloted aircraft, namely the Predator, really in the early days. So the Predator, originally kind of a surveillance aircraft, you know, with the cameras, infrared, all that kind of stuff. Eventually, we've said, hey, we can strap these small Hellfire missiles on here, and now this is basically armed reconnaissance. And took a while, but Air Force kind of slowly took on that mission. CIA obviously still kind of operated as well. And then kind of another cool piece of technology we developed during this time was, you see up there that Mastins. What that is, just kind of put it in kind of layman's terms. You know, a lot of the ground warfare in Afghanistan was taking place in more of the mountainous regions of the country. And what this was able to do was, it was kind of able to penetrate foliage, this infrared, and it was basically able to kind of see heat on the ground. So, you know, these caves that a lot of the Al-Qaeda fighters were hiding in, you know, if there was any electricity kind of exuding, you know, from the mountains, this technology was able to basically hone in on that. And we were really able to use that intelligence to drop, you know, later call in airstrikes or direct ground troops to those locations. Any questions so far?
Is the hyperspectral the thing we're talking about?
Yeah, so that would kind of basically give us that imaging of kind of that heat and electric, the word electric signals, or just kind of the heat cold mountainous regions. So I don't know the technology behind it a whole lot, but. All right, we're going to move forward talking Operation Iraqi Freedom. We'll probably have about 20 minutes or so to finish up on it next week, but we should be able to do those. Maybe 5 of you briefings. Yeah, we'll have time. So we'll already watched Robert's Ridge, so we are not going to watch it. All right, so how old were y'all? March 2003. 9, so a little bit older than you were in 2001, about 2 years older. So anybody, I mean, is this recent enough that you kind of remember a little bit Iraqi freedom? Okay, bits and pieces maybe. Anybody kind of remember, big picture of what the U.S.'s rationale to put a coalition together and how Saddam was?
The weapons of mass destruction.
Okay, weapons of mass destruction. What was kind of the big fear there? That he was making them?
Yeah.
Okay. That he was making them?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay. Anybody remember anything else? Anybody, like, the fear was he's making them, and then what would he do with them? Okay, so that was kind of a big fear. I don't want to call it paranoia, but there was just kind of a large fear that, this Saddam had been kind of non-compliant, or on again, off again compliant with a lot of United Nations weapons inspectors, basically really from 1991 onward, really became a lot more troublesome, 98, 99, 2000, and I kind of remember the Bush Doctrine of preemption. Not only are we going to go out and seek the terrorists, but we're going to go after who else? Okay, anybody who supports or harbors terrorism. So it was thought at the time that Saddam, there was a link between Saddam Hussein and Al Qaeda, and there was fear that these weapons of mass destruction could slip into those hands. And big picture, Saddam wasn't so nice of a guy, was not letting weapons inspectors come in and do their job for the United Nations. So moving forward. Obviously, this kind of goes back all the way to 1991 Gulf War. UN Resolution 687 in the aftermath of the Gulf War prohibited, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction programs from moving forward and prohibited them from supporting international terrorists. And as we kind of discussed, they were breaking these agreements. So not only were any chemical, biological facilities subject to inspections by the United Nations, they were supposed to also be prohibited from having any sort of Scud missiles, so any sort of ballistic missiles that they could attach a warhead to, with the capability of launching further than 150 kilometers, which isn't all that far. So. There's all that information. In addition, in the same UN resolution, paragraph 12 addressed nuclear capabilities, stating that Iraq must agree not to acquire or develop nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons usable material, or any subsystems or components, or any research, development, support, manufacturing facilities, etc., related to the above. And in regard to terrorism, paragraph 32 stated that Iraq will not commit or support any act of international terrorism or allow any organization directed towards the commission of such acts to operate within its territory, and to condemn unequivocally and renounce all acts, methods, and practices of terrorism. So, again, these were kind of the constraints put on Iraq in the aftermath of the Persian Gulf War in 1991. And in several cases, again, Saddam kind of just he was basically blocking UN inspectors from coming in. So, it was kind of hard to say whether or not he had it. We had a lot of intelligence showing that he had kind of all the pieces, maybe not put all together, but that we would see that he was collecting the materials for building some of these ballistic missiles that could travel further than 150 kilometers. He had the materials, maybe not all kind of put together in a chemical weapon, but they did have all the required materials to put together some of these chemical and biological weapons. So in 2002, President George W. Bush addressed the UN Assembly, basically kind of saying, hey, Saddam's been ignoring these UN resolutions since the end of the Gulf War, and that the time was approaching to take action. President Bush made the following statement: "The conduct of the Iraqi regime is a threat to the authority of the United Nations and a threat to peace. Iraq has answered a decade of UN demands with a decade of defiance. We cannot stand and do nothing while dangers gather." Basically later that month, Secretary of State Colin Powell addressed both House, Senate, the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committees concerning the Bush administration's position with Iraq. Basically, he had two main themes: that Iraq continued to defy UN resolutions requiring disarmament, and that it was time to take action to enforce them. And B, that somebody like Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction could possibly supply them to terrorist organization, putting American and allied lives at risk, both at home and abroad. You see up there, October 2002, President Bush signed the Iraq War Resolution. This is kind of a big point I like to make. I'm not trying to portray Bush to be a good guy, bad guy, any of the above. Basically, just kind of getting the authorization for war from Congress, and it passed with the House of Representatives by a vote of 296 to 133, and the Senate passed it by a vote of 77 to 23. So, roughly, 2/3 of the House of Representatives and over 75% of the Senate kind of approved of these measures. So, again, not trying to defend one way or another, but basically the government kind of was completely all more or less bought in. A majority of the government was bought in on this. So then in November 2002, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 1441, giving Iraq one last chance to comply with previous resolutions requiring them to disarm and allow inspectors to verify compliance with disarmament orders. So shortly after, Iraq weapons of mass destruction programs inspections actually did continue after the UN Security Council passed that resolution. But that was short-lived, and the chief UN inspector, who you see up there, Dr. Blix, reported to the United Nations Security Council multiple times that Iraq was not cooperating with inspectors, had not fully disclosed the details of the WMD programs, and had hidden or moved items. So that was kind of a big suspicion at the time, was that they would kind of delay, then let inspectors in, kind of a lot of suspicion that they were moving, not being fully cooperative. So there you see Secretary of State Colin Powell addressing the UN Security Council in February 2003. This is basically the month before we went into Iraq, and presented video and audio evidence pertaining to the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction programs. Secretary Powell also drew suspected links between Iraq and terrorism. After addressing the Security Council 3 more times, he asked the Council to enforce Resolution 1441, which again dealt with more transparency regarding the weapons of mass destruction programs. So all this kind of going down pretty quick. On 16 March 2003, President Bush demanded that Saddam and his sons and other senior leaders within the Hussein regime leave Iraq within 48 hours. Does anybody know what happened? Did they leave Iraq in 48 hours? Okay, no, they didn't. So a couple days later, Bush addressed the nation stating that military operations had begun in Iraq. Near the end of the speech, he emphasized his purpose, protecting our homeland, by saying, Our nation enters this conflict reluctantly, yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines, so that we will not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors in the streets of our cities. So, kind of a lot of fear at this time, that these weapons could fall in the wrong hands and reach U.S. soil. So we'll talk more kind of specifics next week with kind of how we ran the air war and just kind of some bigger lessons learned from the two conflicts. I think instead of 5 next week for briefings, let's shoot for 3. So does anybody not want to do theirs next week? So SMAs. Anybody else want off the list? Okay. So we'll go Schultz, Antonowitz, Kennedy with the presentation next week. Everybody else the week after. And kind of just last note with this, it kind of perplexed, the world, like, why wouldn't Saddam, and I don't know that there is still a good answer to that question, like, why would Saddam just not at least just let inspectors in? It's kind of, at least with the initial inspections, nobody was threatening to kind of oust Saddam from power. It still kind of perplexes, a lot of intelligence analysts to this day. Only kind of thought I've kind of read up on with it is that there was a lot of, Saddam, I think he kind of thought maybe the U.S. was bluffing, that we would not actually invade Iraq, topple his regime. And I think he kind of saw his weapons of mass destruction program, even if it was just kind of like in the development phase, I think he kind of saw that as a bargaining chip. Not maybe with the United States, but kind of more in a regional sense. He knew Iran wouldn't bother him if he had kind of weapons of mass destruction, or at least the threat of those weapons of mass destruction, as well as kind of other not so friendly to Iraq neighbors, kind of like Israel, some other regional powers. So, let's see. We have, what's that?
Max.
Special students, they're getting their field training assignments, so if you want, you can hang out for it. So, next one.
Okay.
Next 2, anybody think they're on the list?
No.
Okay. Anybody think they're on Max 3? Oh, too bad he's not here. Oh.
Hey.
Oh, Max 3. So many of you. Anybody's name still not up there? Hey.
I have to miss Taylor Swift.
Oh no.
I wanted Max 3 so bad.
Send y'all the packing list. Make sure you start getting that stuff together. Also, let me know what dates, times work for y'all for those bag drags. I know it's gonna take a little while to figure that out between y'all, but please give me those dates, times so we can get that on the calendar.
And my parents told me they're flying my brother out at the beginning of August too, so I have to miss him.
The one that he just
Okay.
First time I've been on a plane.